Today's morning coffee vinyl side. Barry Nesbitt and the Highlanders. Scots Wha, 1963. My maternal great grandfather, my mother's paternal grandfather, was born in Scotland in 1881 and came to Canada as a young man in 1906. He was what was then considered a remittance man, one of the many black sheep sent away or encouraged to leave by their families to the colonies, and sustained by an allowance or remittance from home to ensure they stayed away. This was a common term and common phenomena pre-World War I, and there were innumerable reasons for these expulsions of what were often the marginalized set within families. When I heard this as a child, I was proud, assuming that as a black sheep, he must have been ostracized for something like speaking up against patriarchal oppression and the status quo, and that his decision to embrace new lands was reflective of his spirit of adventure and a symbol of his principled opposition to old values and cultural practices. I wove these thoughts into a narrative tied to our Scottish identity. In 1909, he married a 30-year-old Glasgow native who had just arrived in Canada that year. The timing of this marriage and their ages may reflect that it was arranged or that they met soon after her arrival and progressed to marriage very quickly, as they were both getting a little long in the tooth by the standards of the day. That information is lost to time. But our family's Scottish identity was several steps removed from the old country by virtue of my great-grandfather's emigration, and the fact that although he settled in eastern Canada, the whole family, his children, including my grandfather, would eventually settle out west, further distancing them from their original enclaves and common community that maintained cultural ties to the home country. Barry Nesbitt grew up in one of those Eastern Canadian Scottish communities in the same area of Saskatchewan my own family once lived. Like my grandfather, Barry studied music at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Regina, but unlike my grandfather, seemed to embrace his Canadian and Scottish cultural identities. I always marveled at Canadian Scots who would wear kilts and burst out in accents and jokes and stories about being Scottish while roaring with laughter, wishing I had the same kind of connection to the culture. Barry was a radio broadcaster most of his career, but was also an avid performer, and together with the Highlanders, toured and recorded several albums of Scottish-themed music. But as I listen to this, I don't feel any real affinity or connection to Scotland or Scottish culture. I feel nothing. If anything, it feels very Anglo, very inauthentic, in a way that cultural practices get watered down and bastardized as time and distance from the old country carries on. Despite the efforts to maintain them, the Scottish in this has been anglicized. So as I listen to this, I feel no affinity or cultural mana. I feel equally on the outside. This isn't Scottish, and Barry's as lost and dispossessed in that identity as I am. We are kin and kindred in our disconnection. I'm still trying to understand the narrative of my maternal family's disconnect from their cultural roots. There is a story there for sure, and it goes back to that remittance man, my maternal great-grandfather who came over from the old world to the new in 1906. I know now, from details I've pieced together over the years, that he was not a good man, despite maintaining an impeccable reputation as such his whole life. And I wonder if our cultural detachment was more a rejection of him or reflective of his own rejection of and from his family in Scotland and the reasons he was cast out.